We help customers set a vision and mission statement. Now, many companies and many organisations have a vision or mission statement, but what we're now starting to see is they're starting to move those towards sustainability. So how do you move on from from wanting to be the best at something to also wanting to be the best and the most sustainable at what you do? And how does that become a part of your company's DNA? So what do you actually want to achieve? Where do you see yourself as leaders, as those who are driving this change forwards, this much needed change forwards? And how are you going to get there? How are you going to achieve your vision and make sure that you meet it? So as I say, we're thinking back to that circle just a moment ago. That's kind of the first half, the difficult part of the journey. It's not about the practicalities, it's not about what you can actually do from a lighting point of view or ventilation point of view. It's about who you are as a company. It's about making sure that your message is clear, that you have a coherent point that you want to get to. Inevitably, the next question that follows on from that is, okay, so that's a starting point. And you say to a business, when do you want to be net zero by? So with UK PLC, 2050. Can do better than that. And generally speaking, the business will turn around to us and say, well, when can you get us there by? And it's the wrong question to ask. Our view is that the question that you need to ask is, what do I need to get to the date that I set in place? If you don't set a date in stone and make it part of living and breathing your sustainability, you will let that date drift. You'll keep waiting for the magic bullet that comes along that is ultimately going to get you there sooner or later. So we work with customers to say, okay, given where you want to be net zero, you want to be keeping up with your competitors, you want to steal a march on your competitors, how about we look at 2030, 2035? 2040 at a push, and we'll gauge how ambitious that level of ambition is based on where that company currently is and what the environment is like in which that company operates. What's the culture like from an investment point of view? Is your senior management on board with the transition, why you want to get there? Is your operations department on board with what you're trying to do? Does it permeate your workforce? Is everybody in line with that? Once you've set out the attitude to sustainability, put a date in place and we will work out how to get you to that date. Don't let yourself drift. Make a public statement, say we're going to be net zero by 2035 and stick to it. Don't overly commit, but don't undercommit either. So we help customers with baselining as the next natural step. You can't start to tackle something unless you've measured it in the first place. So clearly, working across all of the 3 different scopes, we help the customer put their baseline together. Scope 1 and 2, we find businesses are generally quite good with. So that's their electricity usage, their fuel usage, energy usage, which is in their own control. Businesses are relatively au fait with that. Scope 3, 15 categories across Scope 3. It's overly complicated, many would say, in the world of regulation, but that's how it is. And when it comes to your upstream and downstream activities, how do you get that information together? But that information is generally available. It's available through business procurement teams. It's available through legal teams. Effectively, it's a time-based piece of work to collate that information together and to put some meaningful analysis behind that and to understand exactly where you are. Most businesses, as you're probably aware in the room, around about 80 to 90% of overall carbon footprint is in Scope 3. So without dealing with that part, you can't be considered net zero. Many customers put in place an interim target to deal with their Scope 1 and 2 first, and we'll deal with Scope 3 as they go forwards. But we would always encourage businesses to take that first step into the Scope 3 world. You can always add to it later. You refine it. The data isn't always easily to hand. Many businesses, for example, have an idea of how much they spend on travel, but they don't necessarily record the mileage or how it's done, or which flights were taken to the United States and which ones were taken just to Europe, and how that person travelled. Did they travel first class? Did they travel economy? There's a level of detail in there, but take the first step is always our first port of call, because as I say, generally speaking, you will overestimate your footprint initially, and as you refine it, your number will fall naturally as you refine the calculations. So we prompt our customers really to focus on these 6 different areas predominantly ourselves. So energy we cover off ourselves quite easily, but from a business point of view, from a business action point of view, you're looking at energy reduction measures, renewable deployment, ultimately as a last resort, green certificates, those kind of initiatives. Transport, waste, water, the supply chain, generally speaking, falls into the Scope 3 world. Obviously, some transport doesn't. Relatively new to us is IT and software. We have some businesses who are big software users, and they never ever considered the carbon footprint of the data centres that they use. Everything's running through a big data centre somewhere in the Thames Valley. What's the carbon footprint of that? It's a Scope 3 emission, ultimately. And there are things that you can do with your IT and software to cut down your intensity from a software point of view. So there are so the net zero journey doesn't just focus on that energy part, which is very, very obvious under Scope 1 and 2, but you need to broaden it out into all of these different categories in order to make a meaningful difference. Supply chain is an interesting one, working with some customers, looking at how they improve their procurement processes, their tender processes, their policies, how they engage with their supply chains to make sure that their supply chain is helping them on their transition journey.
Wow.
Making sure that they're working with companies that themselves have a pathway in place. They've already baselined their emissions. You know, if you're buying widgets from company A, what the carbon footprint is of those widgets that you're taking delivery of. It all helps.
Yeah.
The full value chain ultimately leads to you being able to put together an emissions trajectory. So some important things to consider when you're looking at putting together a strategy for net zero is to look at any contributors or detractors there may be coming up for your business. So is the business doubling in size over the next 5 years? That would make a huge difference to your absolute emissions. Are you doing anything that's going to be a contributor? Is the business going to halve in size? Are you streamlining your business so you're going to a two-shift pattern rather than 3? All those different things that can help to contribute towards your net zero ambition. We also have a look at what we call customer measures. So that's things that the customer's already identified that they can do. Lighting's a prime example. Many businesses that we talk to have already looked at lighting. It's a low-hanging fruit. It's fairly obvious user of energy within a building, very, very prominent and in your face. Has everybody converted to LED, for example? So we'll consider the customer measures. We recommend that businesses carry out an audit of their sites to identify what more can be done, to look at the ventilation, the building fabric, etc., etc. And then we also have a list of what we could consider generic measures, and this information is readily available through CIBSE and organisations like that, of things that similar organisations can do. So something that may not necessarily be identified as something specific for your building, but something which could be considered as part of a bigger programme of works for given the sector that you operate in or the type of buildings that you have. And that builds into what we consider to be gateway measures. So gateway measures are things which help you to measure your carbon footprint and also to manage it, start to manage it. So having good data in place. Many businesses say that they don't know how they use their energy. Well, look at if you get good data processes in place and start recording through smart meters, looking at how you use your energy, you can start to manage it. You can start to mitigate. You can move those peaks in usage. You can identify areas of wastage. It's all easy to do. It just takes the time to actually analyse and put some science into the numbers. Cultural engagement programs are important. We believe very, very firmly that, I'll talk about this in a little bit more in a moment, but that a sustainable organisation should have a culture of sustainability. It's part of the business's DNA. Site optimisation audits, make sure all of the existing technology is working as it should. Make sure there's no wastage from that point of view. Our building's being heated to 23 degrees when 21 is perfectly adequate. And perhaps putting in place central control systems to make sure that once the buildings are optimised, they stay optimised. As I say, we recommend audits that will look at specifically at the building fabric, other things that can be done in terms of insulation, etc., new roofs, new windows, glazing, all those kind of things that can be done. Heating systems. Businesses find that carbon emissions associated with gas usage are the most difficult to mitigate, because there's nothing else you can do with the carbon from those. You could buy offsets, but we recommend that as a last resort. But you can't buy, well, you can buy green gas, but it's not readily available in the UK as things currently stand, and it's exorbitantly expensive. So are there different ways that you could heat your building? Could you look at air source heat pumps? Could you look at potentially biomass boilers instead of gas? Depends upon what, it's horses for courses. It depends upon who the customer is and what they're looking to do. Lighting, as I mentioned, the use of LED and lighting controls, very, very important, making sure that lights go out and that occupancy controls are put in place. Looking at ventilation, looking at motors, making sure that all of the most energy efficient motors are in place, and that the building is meeting all kind of legislation with regards to the minimum standards that that buildings should be built to these days. Retrofitting, making sure that buildings are optimised to run as efficiently as possible. And as I say, there are those generic things, non-site specific. They can be applied based on building type and use. So are there other things that may apply? Over door heaters, and all sorts of weird and wonderful things that might appear.